Hello and welcome to Hamilton the Podcast. I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
Welcome to the Reynolds Pamphlet.
That's right, the eye of the hurricane has passed, and now we are going to see the rest of the storm hitting the fan.
Have you read this? Shh.
Actually, yeah. Yeah, I did read this.
Hey, me too.
This was really long.
Yeah.
It took a lot. It was a slow read, lots of big words, but it's actually really intriguing to go through it after having studied a lot of the things that we've covered already in the Hamilton podcast here at Graphomania Podcast Network. We've actually seen a lot of the things he incorporates into this letter play out in our previous songs.
Yeah, it was really interesting to go to that source material because looking through this, you can tell, oh, Lin-Manuel Miranda read this because a lot of this is integrated into the lyrics here. And of course, Chernow read it. So you get a lot of those references where, oh, this is something that Chernow was quoting and I saw this story. And so it's cool to see that source material finally and read through it all.
Yeah, that's a really good observation. We've been reading a lot of biographies and histories by Chernow and others who are basically secondary documents. Those aren't actually the documents written by Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Those are historians who have gone back to the source materials themselves and are trying to summarize and organize it in a way that we can receive it on our own. And then all of us have been huge fans of Hamilton the Musical, which is kind of a tertiary or a third source where
right.
Lin-Manuel Miranda got his information from Chernow, who went back to the primary documents and did all of the research for us and put all of this into the organization that he did. And so going back to the primary documents is a really fascinating thing. Once you have that knowledge base so that you understand a little bit of the context of what's going on there, it's really neat. So one of the sources that one of our listeners tweeted to us is founders.archives.gov, where you can go onto the website and actually read a lot of the primary documents written by the actual founders of our country. It has a lot of the letters and the correspondence back and forth, and this will give you the opportunity to go back to some of these primary documents like we did this week and dive into what is really written in the Reynolds Pamphlet.
Yeah, that's the website where I used to read it on. It's really well laid out and gives you an easy way to read through those documents. They actually even have the original draft that he wrote out with the crossed out words and some of his marginal notes in there. It's really interesting to look through.
Oh, that's fascinating. I actually read it through the New York Historical Society collection of writings that you gave me for Christmas, I think. So
nice.
It was nice to go through that and write a lot of marginal notes and argue with him back and forth and try to see what he's saying and paraphrase that. At the end of this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of give you a really quick review of what is in the Reynolds Pamphlet itself. We're going to start this episode, though, by going through the musical's song entitled The Reynolds Pamphlet, because you get to see a lot of the reactions that people have to what was written down and a lot of really fascinating things happening on the stage, and so we don't want to miss any of that, so we're going to start off right there, and then we're actually, in between the two segments of this show, we're going to actually have a deleted scene that we discuss from the musical back when it was off-Broadway, because Angelica has a lot more lines in the original version than she gets in this song itself.
So diving into the song here, we just came off of this calm, quiet moment in the hurricane, and everything's about to go crazy. The Reynolds Pamphlet, which is more accurately known as Observations on Certain Documents Contained in Numbers 5 and 6 of the History of the United States for the year 1796, in which the charge of speculation against Alexander Hamilton, late Secretary of the Treasury, is fully refuted. Written by himself.
Yeah, if it wasn't written by him, he probably would have had a little bit more input on the title, and the publishers would have come back and said, you need something smaller because it doesn't really fit on the cover. That's ridiculous to write.
Why don't we just call it the Reynolds Pamphlet? That would be nice.
No. We need to be a lot more specific. I need to write so many more words.
So as the music starts here, you get this slow bass line. And from what I've read, and it does kind of sound accurate, but I haven't actually done the full research myself. Mm-hmm. This seems to be a really, really slowed down monstrosity version of the bass line from Right Hand Man.
Oh, that's interesting. I love that idea. This being the distorted version of that. In Right Hand Man, you see Alexander Hamilton rising up and taking his place at the right hand of the father, the founding father of America, George Washington. And here in this song, you see more and more of his downfall, his fall from status and his legacy being redefined and really going down the drain.
Yeah, and on that same note of the music having a deeper meaning here, the genre of this song is a little bit different than the rest of our musical. Mm-hmm. And doing some research, it's what's called the trap genre of rap music. And typically this was rap music that was about a certain thing. It was about not being able to get out of the lifestyle of basically growing up on the streets, being forced to sell drugs to make money and that type of thing. The genre of music was about rappers who, even though they had risen towards some kind of fame and celebrity, still had to sling drugs and do those things because they couldn't get out of that life. It was a trap for them. And so that's what those songs would be about. But it formed more into a genre of its own, where it was a lot of electronica music, voice distortion and layering, and auto-tuning, which we will see in this song.
Oh, yeah. All of those features are here in a really well-done way. I like the way that distortion adds to the effect that everything in his life, from his family life to his political struggles, is really going to be affected by the fallout of the Reynolds Pamphlet being published.
And I like the double meaning that comes from that genre here, that Hamilton has trapped himself politically. He's set his course in his life and from where it's going to go from now on.
Yeah, this definitely is a redefining of everything that we think of when we think of Alexander Hamilton. If anybody knows anything about Alexander Hamilton, you probably know, first of all, that he was shot in a duel. Secondly, you might know that he had this affair, the Reynolds Pamphlet affair. Yeah. That's usually pretty high up there on the list of the top 3 or 4 things that people know, in addition to him being the Treasury Secretary of the United States under Washington.
So setting the stage, we're going to see Hamilton get up on his desk, standing there, delivering basically the pamphlet along with Jefferson reading it out loud. He's basically getting up on the pedestal, letting people judge him, look at him. He's like, I'm here, I'm presenting myself publicly, and I'm presenting this information to everyone around me. And you'll have Jefferson, Madison, and Burr gather in front to read the document. And you'll see that the ensemble is all carrying the document. They're kind of holding it out and turning it and almost like they're in surprise looking at this document.
Yeah, it's a very Newsies moment where everyone has gotten the paper.
I didn't think about that, but you're totally accurate.
Yeah, everybody's got the papes and they're out there slinging it and everyone is reading it. Everyone is shouting for the highlights and they're ready to read what's going on in the affair.
Yeah, so they announce the Reynolds Pamphlet, Jefferson, Madison, and actually, Angelica's voice is heard here. Have you read this? Shh. Which there's a bit of a shh there you can hardly catch at the end. And it's almost like an edited version of a word I'm not going to say on this podcast because we keep things clean around here.
This is a clean. We did not handle the explicit label on iTunes.
But it's funny because if they had not edited it, it would rhyme with pamphlet.
Pamphlet. Have you read this?
That's all we'll say for now.
Right. We'll be able to shush about it.
That's a common way to censor that word, so it is kind of funny.
Right. And so then after Angelica expresses outrage in her tone when she says, have you read this? Well, she's not going to be heard from again until she actually hops on a ship and comes to the United States. And later on, when she arrives, she has that confrontation with Hamilton.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a while to get to America, like half a song.
It takes half a song to get there. We'll travel by montage to get to the United States. And then you have our trio of Republicans taking the stage, and you have Burr, Jefferson, and Madison, who have been that Republican Jacobin alliance of people who are going against Hamilton. They get together and they start summarizing. They say, Alexander Hamilton had a torrid affair, and he wrote it down right there.
I like that way that they say Alexander Hamilton, because it's almost in that same motif way that they usually say it, but there's something distorted there. There's a mockery there of it. Maybe even, like the music here, a complete distortion of it.
Yeah, I like that he comes in and he's always got this upbeat version of introducing himself, Alexander Hamilton. And then when they do it, it's that distorted mockery of Alexander Hamilton. And there's that jest in their voice that they are so excited that this is going to destroy him and he's never going to be president now.
Yeah, there's even almost the idea of he's destroyed his image, so even his name is not said the same way now.
Ooh, that's great.
I like when Madison jumps in there. Highlights!
Yeah, because like we said, this is a long document that he published. You definitely want to read the bullet-pointed headline news edition of what this is most of the time.
I mean, 98 pages is quite a lot. To quote Jefferson from Cabinet Battle Number 1, it's too many pages for any man to understand.
Right. They do go on to summarize one of the highlights of this entire pamphlet by giving an almost verbatim quote from Hamilton's words himself. The charge against me is a connection with one James Reynolds for purposes of improper speculation. My real crime is an amorous connection with his wife for a considerable time with his knowing consent. And the only changes in the actual quote are, instead of saying, for purposes of improper speculation, in the pamphlet he wrote, he says, for purposes of improper pecuniary speculation. So he takes out one word there. And then instead of for a considerable time with his knowing consent. Hamilton actually wrote, for a considerable time with his privity and connivance.
They should have just used that. Those are clear words that we all understand.
Right.
And it's just Hamilton and Jefferson here kind of reading through the letter, singing through the letter, as it were. And there's certain moments where I really like it. People kind of jump in and join them. Like when they say James Reynolds. James Reynolds is on the stage and he runs over and crouches down, does like a hip hop music video pose and says his name and then runs off to the side of the stage. And then when they get to my real crime is an amorous connection with his wife, Burr joins in on that part, which is interesting because Burr has experience in that field.
Yeah, he definitely understands what it means to have an amorous connection with a married woman. We remember Theodosia from Act 1.
But he talked less and didn't publish a pamphlet to let the world know.
That's true. Burr's reaction is very different from Hamilton's, as we've seen throughout this entire musical, and as we'll continue to see for the next few songs at least.
So Hamilton, Jefferson, and Madison go on to say, I had frequent meetings with her, most of them at my own house.
At his own house?
At his own house. And as they're saying this, Hamilton's son Philip comes on the stage here in the middle and joins these three men reading the letter and then walks away with this sad look on his face. His head held low.
Yeah, and the line that follows there is so appropriate for Philip being on stage when he says, Mrs. Hamilton, with our children being absent on a visit to her father. So the staging, just bringing Philip on stage and letting him read what has happened to his father and what has happened with his father, you see that disappointment in his son. You see the pain that he has as he's thinking about, oh my goodness, what has happened? Is this even real? What is going on? Is this real life?
Which is an interesting change from the actual pamphlet itself, where it says Mrs. Hamilton with her children being absent on a visit to her father, which I'm not going to read into that too much. Probably a product of the time. The kids are the mothers who takes care of them. Something like that. It may be more than that, but as far as I know, that's probably going to explain that.
Yeah, I think that it just takes away some of those questions for Lin-Manuel Miranda to change that one little pronoun to say it's our children instead of her children. It just gives us one less accusation to hurl at Hamilton when he's trying to take less responsibility. We already have enough accusations to level against him. It's interesting to me that thus far, James Madison has been fairly minimal in this song. His reactions are, he shouts the word highlights, and he says the dang reaction to what was going on, and then he comes in here and he says no, and he's really just reacting to what's going on. He gets to be one of those characters that show us how the audience should feel. He's saying, oh my goodness, I can't imagine what you just did. I'm so shocked. I'm amazingly just flabbergasted by what's happening. And so I like that Madison's able to do that because it kind of harkens back in my mind to how Hercules Mulligan Oak, who performs both roles, in the first act was that hype guy who was building everything up. And here you get to see him being the reaction guy that's actually showing us how we should respond to these shocking revelations.
So they're going to repeat one more time. Have you read this? After they kind of, finish highlighting it. And then Jefferson in his joy. Well, he's never going to be president now.
Never going to be president now. And they kind of harp on that a little bit.
They do. They kind of repeat that and celebrate for a moment.
Right.
That's one less thing for them to worry about.
Right. If you're on Twitter or anywhere, you may have seen this GIF of Daveed Diggs actually dancing on the desk saying, never going to be president now. And he is just giddy with joy. He's bouncing around. He is so happy that his political opponent has now shot himself in the foot, has trapped him in this circumstance, and he is never going to be that same political rival laying the pavement for our next president after John Adams to be Thomas Jefferson. No contest from Hamilton at that point.
That's right. In the staging here, you have Washington actually walk out as Hamilton climbs off his desk, and Washington kind of gives him this look of disapproval. They don't exchange words. You won't see Washington in this actual recordings of the song here because he doesn't say anything. He just gives him this look of disapproval. And then Jefferson climbs up on the desk and does that dance on the desk, which I love so much, the little bounce he does.
Right. I almost imagine that is the most devastating thing that George Washington could do in that moment.
Right? No words needed.
No words. He just comes in and he just shakes his head. He shakes his head at Hamilton, and he knows everything in that moment is exchanged in that look. It's really well done. I think that Chris Jackson does an amazing job in every single scene where he is George Washington.
Yeah.
And we may not have a lot of actual direct words from George Washington about the Reynolds affair, whether we're in the musical or in history, but if you've read even to page 2 of Ron Chernow's biography, you've read about how when Elder Eliza was sitting in her own house, reflecting on her days with Hamilton and her days since Hamilton had been there, she actually had a silver wine cooler that was tucked beneath the center table, kind of discreet, that had special meaning to Eliza Hamilton, because it was a gift from George Washington as a tacit gesture of solidarity to her when her husband was ensnared in this, the first major sex scandal in American history. So during this time, George Washington may not have said any harsh words to Hamilton, but he did give a nice gesture to Eliza specifically, saying, hey, I'm thinking of you at this time. Just want you to know that we understand what you're going through. We're here for you. And I think that kind of a gift is really noble, and it speaks to George Washington's chivalrous character.
Yeah, it definitely does. And so we see here, Jefferson's prayers have been answered. Remember Cabinet Battle number 1, and pray to God we never see Hamilton's candidacy. He's never going to be president now.
That's right. So what you're saying is Jefferson's prayers to God were not met with indifference.
I guess so, it seems. So then you'll hear a familiar piano start playing in the background here. The satisfied music as Angelica arrives.
All the way from London?
All the way from London. Apparently, the company in this play appreciates how difficult of a journey that is, even if Hamilton doesn't, if you remember back in Take a Break.
Right, because they're reacting to how incredulous they are that she came all this way to actually respond to what is happening.
And Hamilton is going to say Angelica in that sing-song way that he usually does, meaning he's kind of caught up and longing for her here, hoping for a reprieve, hoping that he has forgiveness in her arms, hoping he has some grace in her and an ally.
Yeah, he actually has that optimism and it's like relief in his voice when he says, thank God, someone who understands what I'm struggling here to do. He looks at her as someone who has always been in his corner from all the way across the sea, and he knows that in her, he can have an ally. In her, he's going to have support when everyone else on stage is mocking him or is disappointed in him or is actively angry with him. He looks at Angelica and he has optimistic belief that she is in his corner.
And Angelica did historically come to the United States in the same year that the Reynolds Fair came to light, 1797. So this conversation or something similar to it may have been plausible. We don't have historical documents backing that up, but possible.
Yeah, it's true. But it does not go the way Hamilton expected it would.
No. In the staging, he tries to kiss her hand, and she pulls her hand away before he can kiss and says, I'm not here for you.
Oh.
Devastating. And a part of the musical where Hamilton doesn't have any of his friends, he doesn't have that crew, as we've mentioned before, someone that he thought he could hold on to as a friend, as that solid ground, he doesn't have. He is alone.
He is completely alone. And I love that interaction that they have because you see the bond of sisterhood right there. You get to see how strongly Angelica does defend her sister Eliza. And there's no question whatsoever that she is in her sister's court no matter what, because she says that my sister is the most trusting and kind person in the world.
And re-singing that part that we've heard before here, she actually musically modulates the key there and then doesn't leave room for him to defend himself or, debate with her. She modulates the key and then doesn't debate with him.
Oh, clever.
Farmer Refuted reference there, kind of.
And we'll return a little bit more in just a moment to the interaction between Angelica and Hamilton because there was actually a deleted scene once this musical made it onto Broadway. But when it was off Broadway, there was a whole song called Congratulations, where when Angelica arrives in the United States, she doesn't just have this short little stanza that she sings to Hamilton. She has a whole verse, a whole song where she just berates him saying, look, you were kind of stupid. You are an idiot in this moment. And so here we get to see in this moment of the song, the final version of the musical as it made it into our cast recordings and onto Broadway, we get to see her singing mainly about her appreciation for her sister, her solidarity with her sister, and how she says, hey, Hamilton, put we had aside because I'm standing at her side. You could never be satisfied. God, I hope you're satisfied.
The intensity that she brings in that moment gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it.
Oh, yeah.
In the staging there, the ensemble kind of encircles them as she's singing that, and they start throwing their pamphlets down on the floor around them. And King George actually comes out kind of dancing along in his celebration as well. Like, oh, America's falling apart slightly, huh? One of their leaders is kind of losing it. Maybe this is a good sign for me. And he's like reading the pamphlet and throws it as well.
Right. I wish that we had a recording of us doing this podcast because you were just kind of shaking your hips a little bit, shimmying your shoulders. It would have been great for everyone to see that the way that I got to.
And they're going to go back into that. Well, he's never going to be president now. And Jefferson, Madison are walking around, shooting off the pamphlets, making it rain around them, just throwing them everywhere to everybody.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of the 2 times when I was actually on the Strip in Las Vegas and people were actively, aggressively passing out little things. If you're ever there, don't grab them. It's bad. But the pamphlets that they were passing out, they are so excited to get these pamphlets into the hands of everybody so that everybody knows exactly what Hamilton did. Historically, that happened a lot, where Hamilton wrote the pamphlet, Hamilton published the pamphlet, and then everybody wanted it to be publicized because this is something that did kind of devastate his reputation. People who already knew about the affair were even more excited to be able to share this, and people who didn't know about the affair may have still had a good opinion of Hamilton, and here that gets destroyed.
Right. So Jefferson and Madison come in and say, hey, at least he was honest with our money. And they might be slightly mocking there, going, well, at least that part's true. This works out both ways for us. He was honest with our money and we get to destroy him. And Hamilton, almost trying to speak up for himself here, says, at least I was honest with our money. Almost like he's trying to rise above his situation vocally. He's fighting with every word to be heard.
Yeah, I actually hadn't heard Hamilton's voice in the recording until several listens through it to hear that he joins them saying, at least I was honest with our money. He here is kind of articulating one of the reasons that he wrote the Reynolds Pamphlet to begin with. It wasn't because he wanted to throw his wife under the bus or he wanted to necessarily just address the sexual scandal that he was accused of historically. It was specifically because he had 2 things that were competing with one another. He could either go down in history as a sexual deviant who was unfaithful to his wife, or he could go down as the first Treasury Secretary of America who was embezzling government funds as an immigrant, who was funneling money his own way and had absolutely no political integrity, no actual pecuniary integrity, and he chose to defend his political reputation because that mattered more to him.
Right, and he's saying here what he wants people's response to be. At least he was honest with our money. But that's not what the ensemble's saying. They're still saying he's never going to be president now because, like it or not, this is going to affect his career.
So the rest of this song is, for the most part, those voices, the company and then everyone else that's been cast on stage so far, kind of singing those reactions that people will have. When you pick up one of these pamphlets, you're either going to say, he's never going to be president now, or you'll say, at least he was honest with our money. If you're a Hamiltonian, you're supporting him, you're going to say, hey, look, this vindicates his actual political reputation. And you're going to support him in that. Or you're going to come away with that Republican view saying that he's never going to be president now. We're going to attack his character from this day forward, and we're going to remind people that you don't want someone as untrustworthy in his marriage as this, because what if he's just as untrustworthy in a political office?
So at the end here, you have Jefferson, Madison, and Burr coming back in with that, have you read this? Shh. And at this point in the stage production, Jefferson's going to walk up to the front of the stage and lean down into the pit, handing Alex Lacamoire a copy of the pamphlet. And Alex Lacamoire's going to stop conducting for a second to go, oh. Yeah. And I'm sure that gets a laugh every time.
Right. I love that they actually bring the pit orchestra into the actual choreography on stage.
Right.
It's a nice little thing for theater goers there. And then you have the final 2 lines of this musical that really do break my heart.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen somebody ruin their own life? And then the company, except for Hamilton and Eliza, say his poor wife.
Right. And that you ever see somebody ruin their own life is the auto-tune line there.
Mm-hmm. And then when Eliza walks on stage, we made the mistake earlier before this episode. We wanted to listen to the song so it was fresh in our minds. And then we let it keep playing for just a couple notes after the Reynolds Pamphlet song. And it kind of broke my heart and put me in a sad spirit. And I didn't think we could record this episode because the next song is Eliza's reaction. And it's so sad.
Yeah, even if you don't let it go over into that next track, you do hear the music start to come in, even at the end of this track.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes immediately into your head if you know where it's going.
Right. It's heartbreaking. We'll get to Eliza Hamilton's reaction in the next song, Burn, during our next episode. But right now, I'd like to go back to that interaction between Angelica and Alexander Hamilton, because there was a whole song on the off-Broadway version, like we mentioned, called Congratulations. We'll put a link to the lyrics in our show notes to the Genius page so you can see that, because there's that whole fleshing out of their whole meeting, and it's really neat. So to give you the lyrics for Congratulations in the off-Broadway version, Alexander, congratulations, you've invented a new kind of stupid, a damage you can never undo kind of stupid, an open all the cages at the zoo kind of stupid. Truly, you didn't think this through? Kind of stupid. Let's review. You took a rumor a few, maybe two people knew, and refuted it by sharing an affair of which no one has accused you. I begged you to take a break. You refused to. So scared of what your enemies will do to you, you're the only enemy you ever seem to lose to. You know why Jefferson can do what he wants? He never dignifies schoolyard taunts with a response. So yeah, congratulations.
I really like the way that they say kind of stupid 3 times there, and then she switches what it means to say, that's kind of stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And then she says, you took a rumor, a few, maybe 2 people knew. Yeah, but we know how rumors grow.
Yeah, rumors only grow.
And then she does mention that Jefferson can do what he wants because he doesn't dignify schoolyard taunts with a response, which is true. He was actually called out for having an affair with his slave, Sally.
Right.
By the same journalist who called out Hamilton, but he didn't respond to it.
Yeah, it would be a few years before that particular allegation would be leveled against Jefferson, so he might have actually had the Reynolds Pamphlet to look back on and say, hey, I remember what it was when Hamilton did this. I'm not even going to touch your accusation. I'm just going to let it be and learn from history.
Right, exactly. So then Alexander, again, sings Angelica almost in that soft, apologetic, like, please, I need you. Angelica, you've redefined your legacy. Congratulations. And Alexander defends himself actually for a line here, unlike in the actual song on our recording. It was an act of political sacrifice. And Angelica shoots him right down. Sacrifice?
You don't understand sacrifice, boy.
Yeah.
I love that.
She says, I languished in a loveless marriage in London. I lived only to read your letters. I look at you and think, God, what have we done with our lives and what did it get us? That doesn't wipe the tears or the years away, but I'm back in the city and I'm here to stay. And you know what I'm here to do?
Angelica?
I'm not here for you.
Oh. That gives me chills when I hear her words.
I know. I can't even say it without getting chills.
It's so hard not to. Lyrically, it's great. She has a lot of the alliteration there with I languished in a loveless marriage in London. I lived to read your letters. I look at you and think. So there's a lot of the stereotypical beauty of Lin-Manuel Miranda's poetry here, which is great. But then the whole idea of what she's had to lay down and sacrifice for her family to get ahead and for her family to go through what it's gone through. And then Hamilton wants to lecture her about sacrifice. She's not having any of that.
No.
The next little stanza that Angelica has is one of the lyrics that made it into the Reynolds Pamphlet song when the final version got on Broadway. And she says, I'm not here for you. I know my sister like I know my own mind. You will never find anyone as trusting or as kind. And 1,000,000 years ago, she said to me, this one's mine. So I stood by. Do you know why? I love my sister more than anything in this life. I will choose her happiness over mine every time. And so she sings about how I was the one that wanted you. Eliza wanted you too. So I sacrificed so that she could have you. Because I know what it's like to sacrifice for my sister Eliza. I know what it's like to lay down something I wanted for her benefit because it was choosing her happiness instead of mine. If Hamilton had followed that advice, if he had chosen her happiness instead of his own temporary pleasure with Maria Reynolds, everything would have been different. All of American history might have been different. When we see the ramifications of this, that idea of her saying, this is the thing I sacrificed. I know what it's like. I'm thinking of Eliza, and you aren't here.
Yeah, and I like that there, she sings out Eliza, and Alexander joins and sings out Eliza. And then Angelica comes right back in. Is the best thing in our lives. So never lose sight of the fact that you have been blessed with the best wife. Congratulations for the rest of your life. Every sacrifice you make is for my sister. Give her the best life. Congratulations. I love that. I love that ending part there.
Mm-hmm.
And he won't lose sight of that. Later, he will write that she was the best of wives and the best of women.
Yeah, and the last letter he leaves for her as he's alive, he clarifies that for her and says, you are the best of wives and best of women. We're used to that in our lyrics. It's one of the lines that always brings a little tear to our eyes.
Yeah, so impactful. What a great deleted scene.
Right. I understand why scenes have to get deleted. Things have to be consolidated in order to make the final product easy to consume, and you have to make decisions as a director, as a writer, in order to make things reach their final stage of production. But that's a beautiful, beautiful scene. As far as our final version does go, though, you get to see Angelica get straight to the point of saying, I'm not here for you, I'm here for Eliza, and the sisterhood theme is emphasized. And so reducing it down does make it to where it's less of Angelica actually accusing Hamilton and having more of a spite with him and an anger against him, and it's more of a sisterhood message in the final version. It boils it down to, I'm here to support my sister.
So if you'd like to look at those lyrics again, they'll be in our show notes.
So that takes us through all of the musical content regarding the Reynolds Pamphlet and the reactions to it. We've been able to see a lot of different people on stage showing their own reaction to what Hamilton has written, what he's confessed, and you get to see in the next song and future songs the family reaction. But I'd like to take a minute, and Vinton and I have sat down and we've actually read through the entire Reynolds Pamphlet itself, which isn't fleshed out very much in this musical. It's just kind of a plot device that's very important. They put it forward, and then you see the character responses to it after the fact. We want to spend a little bit of time just analyzing the letter itself, the actual pamphlet that was published, and Hamilton's own words. We're not going to go through and read the entire thing for you, at least right now, but we do want to give you a bit of an abridged version and a summary of the Reynolds Pamphlet, so you can kind of see that it wasn't just one thing put into it, but it had a lot of angles and a lot of arguments that Hamilton flushed into these 98 pages or so, including exhibits, of course.
And after reading this, we had an idea to possibly do an audio recording of this for everyone out there who would like to hear it. So what we think we might do is put this up on our Patreon page as an exclusive. So if you are someone who contributes to the Patreon page, you will have access to this when we record it. It may come out in a future date, it may not, we're not sure yet. We're still kind of throwing around ideas. But I think we're going to sit down and do an audio recording of this for anyone who is interested here.
Right, because a lot of us like to listen to audio mediums, obviously, because we're on a podcast.
Right.
But personally, I enjoy reading a lot of audio books, listening to a lot of audio books, and I just realized that the Reynolds Pamphlet wasn't in an easy-to-find place as far as finding an audio version of it, so we had to go through the slow version, which is how I learned better anyway, so it was good to go into it. But we thought that we could probably throw together some audio of it so that at a later date, if you want to go through the entire text of the Reynolds Pamphlet, we can read it to you for a bedtime story.
That's right. So remember to check out patreon.com/graphocast and see if it's up there when you're listening to this.
Right. And if that is something you want as a listener, make sure you reach out to us at contact@graphocast.com. Shoot us an email, say, hey, I'm super interested in this, and we'll try to make sure that happens quickly.
So diving right in, we're going to give you a bit of a summary of the Reynolds Pamphlet.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, Alexander Hamilton begins with a direct attack on the spirit of Jacobinism. So Jacobins are the ones that are in league with the Republicans. Those are the ones identifying with Jefferson's cause and respecting the French Revolution and all of the things happening there. And so these are those Republican societies calling themselves Jacobins. And Hamilton takes that spirit of Jacobinism and places it on par with some really deadly forces against humanity. And he says that the spirit of Jacobinism threatens more extensive and complicated mischiefs to the world than have hitherto flowed from the three great scourges of mankind: war, pestilence, and famine.
Yeah.
And so he says, my political opponents are as devastating and as bad and as evil that has evil on par with war, pestilence, and famine. I thought that's a great way to start.
Right.
Just lay it out there.
Yeah, when I first started reading this, on a funny side note, my wife was wanting to take a nap, and I was like, oh, well, I'll read this out loud to you because you'll fall asleep real quick, probably. I think that's about how far I got before she was just like, yep, asleep.
Right. There definitely are big words in here, but I really love the way he writes. There's so much sass. So he does start out there with the attack on the people who are supporting the French Revolution, and he lays out his big attacks against his political enemies to begin with. And then he has this criticism of how propaganda works. He says that if you repeat the same lie over and over and over again, it just might stick, even though the facts have regularly refuted that accusation against him. He says that the Jacobins, the Republicans, are leveling these causes against him over and over again, even though he's gone through congressional hearings that have already vindicated him. Let me read a quick quote. The most direct falsehoods are invented and propagated with undaunted effrontery and relentless perseverance. Lies, often detected and refuted, are still revived and repeated in the hope that the refutation may have been forgotten, or that the frequency and boldness of the accusation may supply the place of truth and proof. Essentially saying, it doesn't matter how many times I've defended myself, they're just going to keep repeating lies at me.
Exactly.
Which is how politics works, right? And it's all about confirmation bias.
Yeah, if you can get one person to believe it, they tell their friend, and they tell their friend, and no one ever needs facts.
Right, and if you've raised enough attacks against this guy, then surely people are going to think, well, he can't be totally blameless because everyone is attacking him, so clearly there's something against him.
In this next part, Hamilton is going to say that his accusers are responsible for attacking his wife, forcing him to release this pamphlet instead of taking the blame for it himself.
Right. He says, with such men, nothing is sacred. Even the fact that it's going to throw my wife under the bus doesn't matter, doesn't size up to their fury against me. They're so mad at me that they're going to throw whoever they can find under the bus.
Right.
And Hamilton goes on to explain how that's normal. That's to be expected. That people who are so baseless and so virtueless as to attack the virtuous people, they will always find accusations to level against the righteous people, right? And he says that even the great and multiplied services of the tried and rarely equaled virtues of a Washington can secure no exemption. So Washington was above reproach, and so they still attacked him. So if he couldn't escape it, he says, how then can I, with pretensions in every way inferior, expect to escape from those accusations? Of course they're going to attack me too, because I'm the good guy. I mean, this is kind of his Kanye West moment where he's saying, I'm all about this. I'm great. I'm wonderful. And I think our friend Josh Unruh was the guy who said that in Hurricane, when Hamilton is all concentrated on writing this pamphlet, he says, it's all about me, all of my things that I can do. That's his Kanye West moment where he's writing all these things down. And he says, right. I'm the good guy. I'm the one who's talented. My enemies know it. And that's why I'm expecting this opposition.
And he'll give his reason here for why he's releasing this, saying, I dare appeal to my immediate fellow citizens of whatever political party for the truth of the assertion.
Yeah, and he says that no man ever carried into public life a more unblemished pecuniary reputation than that with which I undertook the office of Secretary of the Treasury, a character marked by an indifference to acquisition of property rather than an avidity towards it. He says, I didn't do this job so that I could make money. I was actually pretty poor in this job.
He'll later go on to talk about the payments that he made to Mr. Reynolds, saying that he had to split them up. And he's like, if I had been embezzling money, would I have had to split payments up?
Yeah. Did I need to get on a payment plan if I was rolling in the Benjamins?
Except not the Benjamins at the time.
Yeah. So in the next few paragraphs, he goes on and explains that being the upright, righteous person that I was politically, with such a character, it's natural that I expected opposition. I expected opposition to the political principles, to my virtues, because I knew that evil people would oppose me as the good guy, but I didn't necessarily expect an attack on my integrity and fidelity in a pecuniary sense, he says, in a way that he didn't think that his financial record would be called into question. He was so above reproach in that area that he thought, surely there's no way you can ever level an attack against me and take that seriously, because that's just ridiculous.
Right. And he says, the inquiry took place, conducted by a committee of 15 members, a majority of them either my decided political enemies or inclined against me, some of them the most active and intelligent of my opponents, without a single man who, being known to be friendly to me, possessed also such knowledge and experience of public affairs as would enable him to counteract injurious intrigues.
Yeah, so here he's talking about the first Giles investigation in the House of Representatives that went against him to try to articulate whether or not the Treasury Secretary had done anything illegal. And he lays out the terms of the accusations, saying, I'm being attacked because I held an opinion that no one else really understood. I held an opinion that public debt ought to be provided for on the basis of the contract upon which it was created. We ought to honor public debt, and we ought to assume it respectfully and responsibly. And so when the Congress got together and created that committee to challenge him, he says, all the people on the committee, there were a lot of ignorant people who didn't really understand how credit works. And there were a lot of political enemies of mine who may have understood it, and they were intelligent and brilliant, but they were actively anti-Hamiltonian, and they were going to find anything they could to tear me down. So he says that everyone opposed to me in this moment was actually opposed to me. Everyone on the committee that was supposed to be unbiased in their analyzation was going to look at me and really try to do anything in their power to tear me down.
Then he'll say, my enemies, finding no handle for their malice, abandoned the pursuit. Yet unwilling to leave any ambiguity upon the point, he basically will pursue more to push in, saying, hey, you're my worst of enemies. Keep looking. See if you can find anything. Keep digging, because I'm clean.
And that was essentially the decision of the original committee that assessed the whole situation. They said all of our suspicions were groundless. And so the House of Representatives closed the investigation into Hamilton's department and the Treasury. From there, since Hamilton was ready to resign his office, he wanted to leave with no ambiguity whatsoever, with no question about his character. So he went to the Congress and said, hey, will you reopen the investigation that was made against me? And when it was reopened, they came up with the same decision. They said there was no cause for accusations against me. And then Hamilton goes on and he says, and on another occasion, in addition to the actual investigations that had been done so far, a worthless man of the name of Francis found encouragement to bring forward against to the House of Representatives and to try to increase the charges against me. I love that.
Yeah, me too. I specifically stopped on that phrase, a worthless man.
Right. There's a footnote later on. Hamilton includes an excerpt from the Journal of the House of Representatives and says that guy's claims were completely illiberal and groundless, that there was no merit to what they were saying, and in fact, Hamilton and his officers in the Treasury conducted themselves in a meritorious way, doing a public service to everybody in a way that really satisfied what he needed to do. And when he puts that footnote in there, he talks about this Francis guy, and he says, would it be believed that after all of this, after the Congress has declared this guy completely groundless, that Mr. Jefferson, Vice President of the United States, would write to this Francis friendly letters? So he puts that jab in there saying, this guy was discredited by the congressional investigation, and yet Thomas Jefferson is still friends with him.
Right.
Hamilton then kind of repeats the fact that even though these investigations have been made and my character has been proved over and over again, he has that quote that goes back to what we talked about at the beginning, where he says, it is a maxim deeply engraft in the dark system that no character, however upright, is a match for constantly reiterated attacks, however false. You're dealing with people who are just following a narrative, and it doesn't matter what facts support them. It's just going to confirm their bias, and they're going to keep repeating the same stories over and over again. And Hamilton is upset about that. But even though he's upset, he does stoop to reluctantly give a formal vindication against those attacks that had been leveled against him. And so in his response, he gives us that quote from the actual musical, the Reynolds Pamphlet, where he has a whole paragraph in there about the charges against him.
So yeah, this is the part where he drops the mic. He says, you're looking for this thing I did wrong? Let me tell you how you don't know what you know, like we've talked about in the podcast. It was an affair, not a financial wrongdoing that I did.
Yeah, I love that. And he does go on, and he has that whole paragraph about how I make this confession not without a blush. I am ashamed of what I did. I never cease to condemn myself for the pain and the fact that it has caused harm to my family and to the people that I love. But it is necessary for me to put that forward. And he says that next, I'm going to go through all the evidence that has been presented. James Reynolds had leaked a couple letters that they had, hinting that Hamilton had been involved in speculation, hinting that Hamilton should be indicted for his crimes financially. And Hamilton says, hey, everyone who's read those doesn't even know what they know. I'm going to go through and show you why it is that those documents were really written and what it is that makes it to where those claims are completely foundationless.
Yeah, he walks you through some of the letters, which he includes in the pamphlet, and shows you, how could this be if this, and how could this be if this?
He has a whole section where he says, if I did it, I wouldn't have done it like that.
Exactly.
If I did this thing that you're accusing me of, I'm not stupid enough to bring a guy like James Reynolds into this. I have a lot of better connections, and I'd be unable to stoop to the foolishness of using a man who's already been blamed for speculation. I wouldn't have stooped to that level. And I really like that argument where he says, if I were to do this, I would have been smarter and I would have gotten away with it. But I didn't do it.
So he goes through the letters and traces the events that happened. And he uses the letters to show that he didn't trust Reynolds to begin with. Why would he be working with him?
And he does go into all of the different details of their affair. And first, he is summarizing the attacks that were leveled against him, saying, these are the things you read from James Reynolds. Let me tell you what they actually meant. And let me tell you how the evidence that's out there already vindicates me. Then he transitions and starts going into his own version of the story, which is where he says things about how, hey, Mrs. Reynolds was either an accomplice in the scheme or she actually loved me. She was either a willing accomplice or she was just duped by her husband just like I was. And so you get to see some interesting little comments in there and some things he says about Mariah Reynolds and about the group that was accused of speculation. So that's James Reynolds and Mr. Klingman. And he points out how if those guys were so close to one another, why am I only connected with James Reynolds and not the other ones? He says that all the evidence shows that I was just corresponding about one thing with James Reynolds, and let me tell you what it was. It was an affair. And he goes into the whole description, and he has a quote that goes into the musical in that way, where he says, after all this, I had frequent meetings with her, most of them at my own house, Mrs. Hamilton with her children being absent on a visit to their father. And he confesses the whole thing we've talked about in this musical. And we'll kind of summarize a lot of the rest of this so that we don't dive into too much. But he does at one point say the intercourse with Mrs. Reynolds, I don't know if that's an unfortunate use of the word
right.
or not, but the intercourse with Mrs. Reynolds in the meantime continued. And though various reflections induced me to wish a cessation of it, yet her conduct made it extremely difficult to disentangle myself. So her actions made it hard for me to quit. I
Right.
couldn't say no to it. Yeah, oh please. Please, Hamilton, you could have walked away.
Yeah, exactly. Say no to this.
He talks about how he decided to adopt a plan of gradual discontinuance rather than sudden interruption. He says, I was just going to kind of trickle off. I thought that we would just kind of fade out. Maybe we'd stop seeing each other in the streets, and maybe it would just kind of happen.
Oh, good to know, Hamilton. You had a plan of when you were going to quit having an affair on your wife.
Right. When he gets to the part of the story where James Reynolds comes up and writes a letter to Alexander saying, hey, dear sir, I hope this letter finds you in good health and in a prosperous enough position to put wealth in the pockets of people like these down on their luck. You see, it was my wife you decided to...
What?
Those aren't exactly the words that James Reynolds used. When Reynolds accused Hamilton, he was hinting about it all. He didn't want to really say it all. And so Hamilton says, I called him in my office, and I was just like, hey, say it. Say the thing.
Yeah, he's like, I'm not going to say it. You say it.
Right. If you are so resolved to have satisfaction, he says, then you need to actually lay down the claim at my feet. Tell me what I need to answer for. And it's kind of an awkward exchange, I imagine. I feel that it's kind of like that playground taunts back and forth. It's kind of silly.
So he gets finished going through the events of the affair and brings us to that meeting of those three. Not the same three in the musical, as we remember. Muhlenberg, Monroe, and Venerable approaching him, accusing him, but they don't know what they think they know.
Right, and we've already talked about that on a previous episode. And in this pamphlet, it's interesting how Alexander sort of says that Muhlenberg and Venable had a degree of sensibility. They were pretty respectful about it all, and Mr. Monroe was more cold, but entirely explicit. So he doesn't trust James Monroe. And if you're interested in why that was, listen to one of our previous episodes about that actual confrontation in the song We Know.
So he's going to throw Klingman and Reynolds under the bus here, quite rightly, saying, hey, these guys are in trouble for wrongdoings already. They're imprisoned, and you're going to take their word over mine?
Yeah, that's important. He says that if they're worthy of credit, then yeah, I'm guilty. But if they're not, if you can already prove that they are untrustworthy people, which by their own confessions they were, then all wire-drawn inferences from their parts are complete nonsense, and they don't deserve to be trusted.
Absolutely.
He even accuses Reynolds of being completely desperate, saying if this was a real accusation he was concerned about, he would have came forward sooner instead of when he was in prison. If he actually had real important documents that would convict him, he would have said something a lot sooner than when he was at the end of his rope trying to get out of prison to convince people that he could get onto the streets. He was willing to say anything. He was a desperate man who doesn't deserve public trust.
He brings us to a close saying, for what? all these people are just jealous of me. Why it is said to tear up the last twig of jealousy. Basically accusing all of his attackers of just being jealous.
Yeah, and he's like, how could I have imagined that they still harbored jealous feelings? It's really interesting how he does that. It's very prideful, very Kanye, very much his attitude when he's writing this in the song Hurricane. Toward the end, he has his answer for why, Hamilton, would you even waste so much time stooping to the level of these people like Klingman and like Reynolds who are leveling accusations against you? Why would you go so low as to respond to them? And in Hamilton's second to last paragraph, he says essentially that, yeah, I understand. You're asking why would I waste so much time writing about that? He raises the question himself, and he says, the bare perusal of the letters from Reynolds and his wife is sufficient to convince my greatest enemy that there is nothing worse in the affair than the regular and indelicate amour. And so he says, yeah, I probably could have just stopped at publishing that. But he said that he had a desire to destroy the slander completely. He didn't want to leave a single thread of that out. And so he says, I paid pretty severely for the folly, and I can never recollect that pride that I had without disgust and self-condemnation. The fact that I've gone through these things that really make me feel terrible. But at the same time, I really cherish my political reputation, and I'm not going to let the likes of Klingman and Reynolds destroy that and actually tear down my legacy.
So we see here, this pamphlet, he runs through all this information. His attacks, he has an answer to every one, and he's willing to throw himself under the bus to prove how clean he is politically.
And so you see that he cherishes his political reputation more than his reputation as a husband. When that is translated into our musical, you see over and over again, Eliza saying things like, you don't need a legacy politically, just stay here and let us be enough.
Yeah.
Let's live for your family. Let your family be satisfying to you. And Hamilton, as shown in this pamphlet, cherishes that legacy, that public legacy, way more than Eliza would like him to.
Yeah. Because of this pamphlet, he threw himself under the bus and drug his family with him. And on our next episode, we're going to see the repercussions from Eliza's side, the way she feels about being pulled under the bus for his political career.
Yeah, can I just say, I'm really worried for the next few episodes. I don't know if I'm going to be able to emotionally make it.
Yeah, there might be a lot of cuts, a lot of sobbing. Yeah. I'll have tissues at the ready.
Yes, it's going to take a long time for me to get through some of these hard songs that are just going to break my heart over and over again like they always do.
That's a problem for future Robbie.
Oh, yeah.
And
future Robbie
Vinton
can deal with it. Yep.
They're going to be so mad at us.
I'm so mad at past Robbie already.
So quick announcement. We now have a YouTube page for anyone who listens to the podcast but doesn't necessarily like using their podcast apps or has friends who don't know what podcasts are but knows what YouTube is. You can now suggest that they listen to us on YouTube or go yourself and find us on YouTube. There's no quick, easy link when it comes to YouTube channels, as far as I know, but you can search Graphomania Podcast Network and we'll come up. You can also search Hamilton Podcast, but we'll be a little bit down because we just started and we don't have any views yet. Right.
And we don't have every single episode of Hamilton the Podcast on YouTube yet, on the YouTube channel, but we're getting there.
I'm working on it.
Vinton is working so hard, guys. You need to send him some love on Twitter this week because he is doing so much work to make sure that Graphomania as a podcast network is up and running. He does so much great stuff. I encourage you to send your love, send your support. If you're so inclined, get on Patreon and contribute to support the things he does with this podcast and with some of the others, with Hancock Creative, with Read Brave, and with the Botchcast podcast, which I'm really excited to play again.
Oh, yeah, me too. So until next week, remember, you can contact us at contact@graphocast.com. You can leave comments on the webpage, graphocast.com. Hit us up on Twitter at Graphocast. Or personally, I'm at Flesh Eater.
And I'm at Alpha Knight.
Robbie, are you ready for next week?
I don't think I am.
I'm not ready to feel the burn either.
Oh, you did that. You went there.
Be prepared to cry. See you next week. Hi, Vinton Bayne here again for a real quick announcement. The Graphomania Podcast Network has a new podcast, Read Brave Comics, a comics podcast where your hosts, Corey Casto and I, will introduce you to a wide variety of segments about the world of comic books. some of which will include segments by me and Robbie from this very Hamilton podcast. Check it out now on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or at graphocast.com, graphocast.com. That's Read Brave Comics.